The BBC won't broadcast the appeal. I'm going to do it myself. Anyone who wants to contribute,
yes,
I'm going to do that. And I'm sorry, you're not going to stop me. You're not going to stop me.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
But, Mr. Speaker, turning to another important issue, the government has suspended 30 of the UK's 350 arms export licences to Israel. It's a decision that the Chief Rabbi says beggars belief.
We will, of course, continue to stand by Israel's right to self-defense.
I don't talk without facts. And facts conclusively prove here that this country has gone to the dogs. The country is doomed.
It just seems strange. If you remember, one of the accusations was that he went and berated members of the Newsnight team, during an election period.
Oh my God. I seriously didn't think that my former employer BBC can stoop any lower than what it has already sunk through its pathetic and disgraceful and downright genocidal coverage of the Gaza conflict. Now, a report by the Guardian newspaper in London says that the BBC bosses are using the power of the publicly funded corporation to block the Gaza humanitarian appeal by Disaster Emergency Committee, also known as DAC. Anybody who lives in the UK, you know that DAC is a very, very reputed organization. According to the report, the reason why the BBC is blocking the DAC appeal to raise money for those being slaughtered right now and for last 11 months by Israeli terrorists is because the BBC doesn't want to upset the supporters of the rogue regime of Israel. Can you imagine that? And the DEC is not an ordinary organization. It's an umbrella body for 15 top charities registered in the UK. It has always come to the rescue of those facing the brutalities of either natural calamities or victims of wars. The last time it broadcast its appeal was for Ukraine, when the collective efforts of BBC, Sky News, Channel 4, ITV and the government saw DEC raise close to £500 million. That is the kind of money we are talking about. This was an organization that enjoyed global reputation. I have talked about this organization in greater details in both my TEDx talks in the past. And this is not the first time that the BBC has blocked a DEC appeal for Gaza victims. In 2009, when Israeli terrorists had murdered more than 1,300 Palestinians, a veteran politician called Tony Benn had appeared on BBC News TV channel to embarrass the corporation for its depraved action in not allowing DEC appeal to be run for the victims of Gaza genocide then. The logic the presenter had given to justify the inhuman act was that the BBC wasn't sure if the money raised from the appeal will go to the victims of Israeli genocide indeed.
The BBC won't broadcast the appeal. I'm going to do it myself. Anyone who wants to contribute, I'm going to do that. And I'm sorry, you're not going to stop me. You're not going to stop me. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. The Disaster Emergency Committee Gaza Crisis is available at P.O. Box 999, London, EC3A 3AA. And I know from the BBC, because I've been here most of the morning, nobody here agrees with what the BBC have done. 1,330 people have been killed, 460 children, 5,480 casualties, and the reason the BBC have done it is very simple. The Israeli government objected.
Well, the BBC would disagree with you, and you did hear the line from management there that it's a question of raising impartiality. The public will be concerned, and the other issue, of course, will the aid actually get to the people who need it?
Well, if you're telling me that if I send money to Gaza, the BBC's impartiality will affect. I'm sorry, I'm a human being.
If you sent money to Gaza, though, through an appeal, can you be sure that it will get to the people who
Well,
who
in a
want
war
it and who
situation,
need it?
the Israelis have killed 1,330 people. Now, Livni, the Israeli foreign minister, said there is no humanitarian crisis. Now, be clear, the Israelis objected to the BBC. That's the reason.
So being pathetic and supporting the genocidal regime of Israel are nothing new for the BBC. They took pride in opposing humanity 15 years ago. They are happy to repeat their pathetic act even today. So when you blame the likes of Martin Croxall, Yolande Knell, Lucy Williamson and Anita McVeigh for their questionable journalism on Gaza, you should realize that the rot in journalism, rot in BBC journalism is much deeper than what you think. The top management is acting at the behest of the Zionist regime of Israel. Else, how do you justify this action? The only difference between today and 15 years ago is the absence of upright politicians such as Tony Benn in the British Parliament. Benn was the best Prime Minister the United Kingdom refused to have. In today's Parliament, you have a Home Secretary, David Lammy, who begins his speech by pledging allegiance in favor of a rogue country called Israel, when he says that he is a proud Zionist.
Throughout my life, I have been a friend of Israel, a liberal, progressive Zionist who believes in Israel as a democratic state and a homeland for the Jewish people, which has both the right to exist and defend itself.
Also in today's Parliament, you have the leader of the opposition and a former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who registers his protest. Why? Because government has imposed a partial ban on arms sale to Israel. Sunak refers to the hurt sentiments of a rabbi and the members of the Jewish lobby group, the Board of Deputies of British Jews, to demand a rollback on the arms ban.
But Mr. Speaker, turning to another important issue. The government has suspended 30 of the UK's 350 arms export licences to Israel. It's a decision that the chief rabbi says beggars belief and will encourage our shared enemies. Can the Prime Minister therefore explain how his decision will help to secure the release of the 101 hostages still being held by Hamas? Mr. Speaker, not only do these decisions have geopolitical consequences, but they also have emotional ones too. And the Prime Minister took this action on the very same day as the funerals of Israeli hostages murdered by Hamas. It's something that the Board of Deputies described as a terrible, terrible message to be sending. And I hope the Prime Minister understands the hurt that has been caused, and can he take this opportunity to reassure Israel and the Jewish community that the United Kingdom and this House stands behind Israel and its right to self-defence.
So Sunak essentially said that he was hurt that Israel was not being allowed to carry out genocide with impunity. Israel was not allowed to kill more and more women, children and babies. Imagine the outrage if a politician in the British Parliament said that a Muslim imam or a Muslim group was hurt because the UK wasn't allowing a Muslim country to kill more than 41,000 civilians, including 28,000 women, children and babies. Can you imagine the level of outrage in the country? But this time, it didn't bother anyone. Forget the media coverage. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, a man who has built his career claiming to be a human rights lawyer, was unmoved. He went a step further to clarify that he would never do anything to hurt Israel or its interest or the sentiments of those lobby groups in the country.
We will, of course, continue to stand by Israel's right to self-defence. But it is important that we are a country committed to the international rule of law. Let me be very clear about that. I've said it before, I'll say it again. We absolutely recognise and support Israel's right to self-defence and have taken action in support of that right of self-defence. And I've made that repeatedly clear in all of my engagements with Israel across the region and with all of our allies. I absolutely stand by that.
So now you can see the dirty nexus between the corrupt, morally bankrupt and mentally depraved politicians and the country's official broadcaster, the BBC. What's also different this time is the presence of Robbie Gibb in the BBC board. You can watch my earlier video on him here. Gibb is the owner of Jewish Chronicle and has been accused by British MPs in the past of interfering with the editorial policy of the BBC. Don't take my word for it. Watch here.
Now, members of your board have been quite controversial in the past and accused of being partial, politically partial. Mr. Robbie Gibb springs to mind, just given another 4-year term on your board. Is there a set of guidelines for members of the board over impartiality during a general election to ensure that there's no interference, no attempt to? It just seems strange. If you remember, one of the accusations was that he went and berated members of the Newsnight team, during an election period. That wouldn't be appropriate, would it? So, is there a set of guidelines there so that these people remain impartial?
Well, our guidelines apply to output. So what we're focused on is making sure that everything that we do.
Well, isn't he trying to influence output?
Well, first of all, he was invited to Newsnight. I think berated is probably not quite.
We can argue about that.
There's not an argument. It's just true that he was invited. But the berated, I think, is a choice of word which perhaps not everybody would use. He had a discussion with them about the delivery of Newsnight, the delivery of impartiality. There is a code of conduct which applies to all non-executive directors on the board.
Forgive me, but is that his role?
What is wrong?
To go down there and talk to them about delivering, is that what he's on the board for?
No, but there isn't anything in the way in which the board is constructed as a unitary board which says that members of the board or non-executive directors of the board can't speak to programmes if programmes wish them to speak to them. There's nothing that says that. So it's not an offence against the governance of the BBC to do that. Of course, you then might judge what the conversation was about and so on and so forth. I wasn't there. But that's not in principle an offence against the governance of the BBC with a unitary board.
Yeah, I'll go back to my original question, though. Is there some guidance for them during a period of a general election where
there's a clear code of conduct? There is not specific guidelines for in answer directly to your question, we don't specifically say during an election, because I think this is ongoing in terms of the pressures on board members and within the BBC. I think we're ferociously clear on it. There's a lot of noise around it. If any of you are appointed to the board, a board position on the BBC, you are overseeing the executive. You hold us to account in delivering the editorial guidelines.
I don't talk without facts. And facts conclusively prove here that this country has gone to the dogs. The country is doomed. Why? Because politicians have sold their conscience, and the body which would have kept these politicians in check through honest journalism too has become an enabler of genocide. I'm talking about the BBC. That's it from me. I would like to say a massive thank you once again to those who have supported this platform on buymecoffee.com or Patreon. I would also like to request others to do the same. I can't emphasize enough why it's important for all of you, and I say all of you, to support this platform if you want a credible alternative news platform to grow. There's no point complaining that mainstream media is not representing your sentiments if you can't support an independent media platform like this. So it's important to have a powerful alternative media platform who represent your sentiments and views and not that of corrupt establishment or corporations. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.